right. Well, good evening. Thank everybody for being here, and those of you that are watching online, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue on. We started actually last week. We started a new study in the book of Ruth, and I really love this particular book. Just it's kind of there's some sad points to it, but there's some romantic parts to this. But even at the same time, all the way through the book, we just see God's grace and we see God's mercy through the entire book of Ruth. Last week, as we started that, if you watched online, because we had to cancel our services, and so I did a recording. So if you watched last week, and just to kind of catch us up for just a moment, Naomi here was married, and she had two sons, and the two sons and the husband, all three died, and the wives of the two sons, which was Ruth and Opha, they all three were widowed within a very short amount of time of each other. Naomi being a wife, widow, and now a mother that had lost two kids. She had pretty much lost everything. She was very bitter. They were one of the reasons that in this particular part of the story, they were in a foreign land. They were in Moab. The reason why they were in Moab is because there was a famine in Jerusalem. And so they were looking for food, and so that's, they were there. And so once the husbands passed away, Naomi pretty much tells Ruth and Opha to just stay where they're at in their homeland, because Ruth and Opha were both Moabites women. They were not Hebrew. And so she tells them to stay in their land where they're at. They were young. They could remarry. They could do all those kind of things. And Ruth pretty much says, no, you're my mother-in-law, and I'm going to stay with you no matter where you go. And so Naomi decides that she's going to go back to Jerusalem. She's going to go back to Bethlehem, to her home, her hometown, and where she grew up, and to be with her people. And so Ruth ends up going with her, and that's kind of where we find ourselves here in chapter 2. And here in chapter 2, we're going to find this is really kind of where a love story begins. Okay, and it's a love story between a man named Boaz and Ruth being the daughter-in-law to Naomi. But the love story is not just that, but it's a picture of God's beautiful grace. And so I titled tonight, Hesed of God. Hesed, Hesed of God. And we'll get into what Hesed means here in just a moment. So read with me, Ruth chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 1. And it says, "Now Naomi had a kinsman, a relative, of her husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech, whose name was, Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, 'Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one whose sight I might find favor.' And she said to her, 'Go, my daughter.' And so she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, 'May the Lord be with you.' And they said to him, 'May the Lord bless you.' Then Boaz said to his servants, who was in charge of the reapers, 'Whose young woman is this?' The servant in charge of the reapers replied, 'She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab.' And she said, 'Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves.' Thus she came and has remained remained from the morning until now, and she has been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you when you are thirsty. Go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw." And she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner?" And Boaz replied to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of her husband has been fully reported to me. And how you left your father and your mother to the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward you your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." Then she says, "I have found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maid servants." So I want to stop right there and just kind of go. I want to kind of break these first 13 verses down as we're looking here. And as we left the story last week in chapter 1, they were coming from Moab into Israel, or into Jerusalem, where this famine had been taking place. And again, remind you from last week as well that this was during the time of the judges. If you remember, in the time of the judges, that Israel had consistently turned their back on God, consistently had just turned away from God over and over and over and over and over again. And as that had happened, the people eventually cried out to God, and so God did this. God began to send judges, and so these judges that we see, if you go back and read previous book of the Bible here of Judges, you'll go back and see these judges, and there were several of them, that they would lead the people of Israel back on track with God. And there were some great ones, and there were some not so great ones, but they would lead the people back to God. And about the time that they would get led back to God, then all of a sudden they would die off, or something would happen to them, and then the people would turn back against God, turn away from God again, and then God would send another judge. And so this is all happening during that time. And so part of the consequences of the people turning away from God was that there was a famine in the land. And that's during this particular time. And so there's this famine that's going on. And so as Naomi and Ruth make their way back to Jerusalem here, they're for the most part, they're homeless. They don't have any food. They're poor. They don't have jobs. They don't have anywhere to go. Naomi has some family, but her husband has gone. And so, culturally, during this particular time period, when a woman's husband passed away, the husband's family would take care of them if there was a family left. But when she comes back, we don't know. We see that they're, for the most part, they're alone. There's no one there. There is some family that's there because obviously Boaz is part of the husband's family. But they find themselves poor, broke, hungry. And so Naomi is, if you remember from last week, and I encourage you, if you didn't watch last week, go back and watch last week so you kind of catch up where we're at. But Naomi is a little bitter at God. She's a little bitter at God because she's lost her husband. She's lost both of her sons. And so she's a little bitter. And Ruth is wanting to stay by her side. She's left everything that she knows. She, as we find here in this story, as Boaz is even telling her, is like, listen, you're an outstanding woman because you chose to leave your mom, your dad, your homeland, everything that you had, everything that you knew, and you came here to a people that you know absolutely nothing about. You came here to a people that you know nothing about culture or customs or any of those kind of things, and you chose to come here so that you could take care of your mother-in-law, which she did not have to do, by the way. She did not have, that was not part of her responsibility to take care of her mother-in-law, but she chose to do so. And so here, as they find themselves hungry and for the most part homeless and poor, she decides, she makes this promise to Naomi in verse 2. So look at what is going on here. It says, "And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, 'Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one whose sight I might find favor.' And she said to her, 'Go, my daughter.'" So here's what's kind of going on is, so as Ruth tells Naomi, she said, "Listen, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go provide for us. I'm going to go make a living for us. I'm going to go gather us some food. I'm going to go out. I'm going to do whatever I can so that we can have something." And so she makes this comment of, "Let me go to the fields and glean." Well, what does that mean? What does it mean to glean the fields? We'd have to go back to Leviticus to understand what this was. Gleaning the fields is where God had set into place. Okay, God had set into place the people of Israel during harvest time that they would leave certain edges and corners of their fields whenever they would harvest their fields for the poor and the needy, that they would be able to come out, they would be able to pluck the heads of the grain and be able to have some kind of food. And God had set that into place. And so Ruth knew a little bit about the customs and culture of the Jewish people to know, hey, this is set into place. Let me go and work. Let me go and gather some. We'll have something. And she says, so that I may find favor in the eyes of someone. And that, I want you to understand, a lot of people read this, I think, incorrectly, is that she was going to do this and try to find favor in the eyes of a man. Let me go work and try to find a man. And that's not what was happening here. She was trying to find favor that maybe she could find a field that somebody would let her continue to work in, continue to glean in, continue to provide for her in Naomi. That's what was going on here. That's what she was saying. And so Naomi says to her, "Go, my daughter." This is where the word Hesed comes in. It's a blessing. Okay, the word Hesed is literally a blessing. It's to say, go ahead, go on. I give you my blessing. And so that's part of this. But then we get into verse 3. I want you to see what happens in verse 3. This is very interesting. And it says, "So she departed and went and gleaned in the fields after the reapers." So she's in here. So the reapers are coming in, the harvesters, okay? Harvesters are going through the fields. They're reaping the majority, the biggest majority of the fields. They're harvesting. And so as they're harvesting, she's kind of coming in behind. If you know anything about harvesting, she's kind of coming in behind. She's picking up stuff that they're dropping. She's gleaning from the edges of the fields, just like God had set into place. And when it then goes on and says here, "And she happened to come to the portion of the field that belongs to Boaz." This is phraseology, is what this is. So phraseology is when the writer begins to portray his character or sense of humor. Okay? So this is sarcasm. So if we want to just put it in modern day, this is sarcasm, because it says, "She just so happened to be in a field that belonged to Boaz." Now I want to backpedal just a little bit to talk about who Boaz is. Boaz, being a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. It's important to know this because Again, culturally, what would typically happen is when a Jewish woman lost her husband, it was technically the responsibility of the brother of that husband to marry his wife so that they could continue on, right? That's if she didn't have children, but she had 2 boys, right? So it was then important that in that situation that the family of the husband at least then care for Naomi. Well, Ruth was married to Naomi's son. Quick note for just a second. Naomi's 2 sons, their names, if you go back and you read, their 2 names were Mahlon and Chilion, which means sick death. Their names mean sick death. So they died, right? So an interesting fact, just so you know. But because she was married to her sons, she too had not had children, so the other brother had already died, so then family is also supposed to take care of her. Well, guess what? Boaz happens to be family. But not only just Boaz. We have to understand, does anybody know what Boaz means? Boaz's name means man of strength, often used even as a word that we would use for warrior, fighter, strong man of valor. And so, and not only does it mean he's a strong man, not only does it mean that he's a man of valor, he's single. Not only is he single, but he's wealthy. So he's got fields, he's got harvesters, he's got workers, he's single, and he's a man of God, a man of valor, a warrior. I mean, this is like the dream woman or dream man for the woman, right? I mean, so like, why is he still single? It's all, you know, that question that they ask are like, okay, so there's got to be a catch. Why is he still single, right? This is a perfect guy. Why is he still single? Because God had planned. God had a purpose. So, sorry. And so when we get to verse 3, here comes the phraseology. Okay, the phraseology of showing the writer's character of sarcasm. That she just so happened to come to the field that belonged to Boaz. Now, I don't know about you, it seems a little ironic, right, that of all the fields that she could have went and gleaned, of all the fields that she could have went to, she ends up in the field of the stud, the single stud, the single rich stud, right? The single rich stud that's actually a family member of her deceased husband. So she just so happened. This is where we would put air quotes, right? And it just so happened. So this is the sarcasm, that phraseology I was talking about a while ago. And so then we get into verse 4. It says, "Now, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem to see and said to the reapers, 'May the Lord be with you.'" So here again we see this word Hesed. It's a blessing. He blesses the reapers. He tells the reapers, he comes in, and so now, not only, I mean, this dude's just getting better. So not only is he single, not only is he rich, not only is he a stud, not only is he a strong man of valor, not only is he a man of God, he's a respectable man at that because he understands. He comes into his reapers, all of his workers, and he says, let me bless you. Let me pray over you guys today. Let me come in and just tell you how wonderful you are and how much that I appreciate you, and let me bless you. And so he comes in and he has this Hesed, he prays this blessing over them, and then they turn around and do the same thing to him. And so I asked the question, I'm like, why in the world would they do that? Well, Because if you've ever had a boss that you absolutely love, you want to work for them. If you've ever had a boss that you can't stand, you understand, I'm going to do what I have to do, and that's all I will do. Right? So here, as he comes in, he's wonderful to his guys, and his guys turn around, and they're thinking, listen, if he reaps a huge harvest, guess what? We reap a good harvest. If he comes in and blesses us, listen, we want to bless him because then he's going to bless us again. And so he comes in, he prays this blessing over them, and then he comes in verse 5, and that's when he locks eyes. So he says to his servant who is in charge of the reapers, who's that? Who's that lady over there? She's kind of cute, right? So he looks over, he says, whose young woman is this? And so he's asking a question. So here's where we're going to get into the romance part of the story here. Boaz is asking a question within a question. Okay? So he's like, whose woman is this? So he sees her, he's like, I wonder who she is. And does she belong to anybody? Like, is she single? So he's asking a question within a question, right? So he's like, so whose woman is this? And so the servant that was in charge replied, she is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. And this light goes off in Boaz's head. Oh my. She's family, right? She's from family. And she's taking care of my aunt, right? She's, whoever Naomi was to him, we just know he was a kinsman to her. He's taking care of Naomi, she's taking care of Naomi. I'm fixing to treat this woman like a queen because she is taking care of family. And so, verse 7. And he said, please let me, and she, so she comes over, right? Or she must have been standing somewhere close. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. And she's been sitting in the house for a little while. So she pretty much says to him, she goes, if you will let me work. Naomi's back home. She's been sitting in the house for a while. If you'll let me work, listen, I'm willing to put in the work. And Boaz takes notice to this. So Boaz, this stud muffin here, he takes notice. Wow, she's pretty. She's single. She's family. Not like that kind of family, but she's part of the family. Let me help her out. So verse 8. So then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from this one, but stay here with my maids. So he tells her, he says, listen, you will not ever have to worry about anything again. You will not. He just rides in on a white horse, right, in his knight in shining armor and says, listen, you don't have to go anywhere else. You can stay right here. I'll let my fields provide for you and Naomi. And in fact, I don't even really care if you're working in the fields. Stay here with my maidservants. And help them, work with them. And so let me take care of you. And then verse 9, let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. Now, here's the reason why Boaz puts this in here. She's a foreigner. Okay? She is a foreigner. These are farmers. They're workers. They're out in the field. It was not uncommon for men to be men, okay? It's not uncommon for men to be men in this situation. A foreign woman that comes into the field, she's working, that the men would, harass her or, whatever it may be. And so Boaz says, listen, I told my men they're not to touch you. I told my men they're not to talk to you. They're not to mess with you at all. You don't have to worry about it. In fact, you are safe enough that you can go up. And he goes on and says this. He says, in fact, you are safe enough that you can go up and draw from the same cup that they draw from. So Boaz speaks this wonderful news to her, and she does what she knows to do. Verse 10. Then she fell on her face, bowing on the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? She does what she knows. She falls on her face and she simply says, why me? I'm nobody. In fact, I don't even belong here. Why would you take notice of me? Why is it that you see me and you're willing to put all these things into working order? Give me this field, give me this water to drink, give me this protection. Why me? Who am I? Well, then he tells her. So Boaz replied to her, says, all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of her husband has been fully reported to me. And so he just simply tells her, he says, listen, I know who you are. I know what you've done. I see your heart. And he goes on, he says, and you have left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and come to a people that you did not previously know. And then here he says this again in verse 12. And may the Lord reward your work and your wages and be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. He speaks Hesed over her. So not only now has he given her protection, not only now has he given her food, not only has he given her water, he's now blessed her, which is huge because she is a foreigner. And he blesses her. He gives her this Hesed, right? And then we go on in verse 13, and it says, Then she said, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like your maidservants. She takes notice. She says, thank you. You've been wonderful to me. You've been kind to me, even though I'm not one of you. Even though I'm not one of your maidservants. Even though I'm not from here, you have treated me like I have been, or that I am. Now, why is this all so great, wonderful, and important? This word Hesed that we've been talking about tonight literally means, if you translate it from Hebrew into English, means kindness, mercy, loyalty, or blessed. And here we see not only does Naomi speak this kindness and mercy and loyalty and blessing over Ruth, but now Boaz as well begins to speak this blessing, this kindness, this loyalty, this mercy over her. And neither Naomi or Ruth, either one, had any idea what their future held. They were leaving a land that was foreign to Naomi, home to Ruth. They were leaving that, going to the home of Naomi and a foreign land to Ruth. And yet they had no idea what laid ahead of them. They had no money, they had no food, they had no family. All they had was each other. And there are times that we as well wonder what what lies ahead, what does tomorrow hold, where are we gonna get our next meal, where are we gonna get the money to pay our next bill, where's that going to come from, where is this going to come from? There are people that have lost spouses, there are people that have lost family members, and they just think to themselves, what in the world, how in the world am I ever going to not necessarily replace that, or how am I going to fill that void? And the whole time, God was working together a plan that they couldn't even see. I had no idea what was saying. Ruth had no idea what laid ahead of her. She had no idea who Boaz was. She had no idea whose field that she was fixing to walk into, but God did. That's why I think that the sarcasm, the phraseology that we talked a while ago, that's why I think when I see that, I kind of giggle, I kind of laugh that I see this so happened to come into the field, right? She just happened to be in Boaz's field. No, she didn't just happen to be there. God put her there. God had put her on that path. God had set her on that road. God had set her in that direction so that Mr. Studmuffin and her would eventually get together, which is not to spoil the story, but eventually is what's going to happen. And we see here that so many times we question, God, what are you doing? Where are you at? Naomi's asking that question. If you go back and read in chapter 1, Naomi's asking that same question. God, where are you at? What are you doing? Why? Why my husband? Why my 2 sons? Why everything? Why I lose all of it? And here God is in this moment working even when you can't see it. Look on in verse 14. We hadn't read through these parts of the verses yet. It says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here. You may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. And so she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded the servants, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. Also, you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. So Boaz is making his move. So I want you to see the romance in the story here, okay? I really do, because this is a beautiful story. He takes notice of her. And so they're having dinner. Obviously they're all having dinner. They're all sitting around. They're having dinner. He says, come here. I want you to come over. I want you to sit with us. What does that mean? She's a foreigner. Remember, she is a foreigner. And not only is she a foreigner, she's a woman. So culturally in this time, the women didn't just hang out with the guys. Okay, the women had their place over there. The guys had their place over here, and the two did not mingle. But yet Boaz says, come here. I want you to sit with us. He serves her food and drink. Gives her vinegar, gives her a sauce to dip her bread into. And then not only does he do that, but then he looks at all of his workers. He says, here's what I want you to do. Don't talk to her. Don't mouth her. Don't harass her. In fact, what I want you to do is I want to take some of the work that you're doing, and I want you to leave it behind so she doesn't have to work so hard. Man, he's making a move. He is making a move. He is leaving behind. And all this says about him, his character, his name, who he is as a man, who he is as a man of God. And so he's making this move. And then verse 17, it says, and so she gleaned in the fields until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it, and she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she also took it out and gave Naomi what she had left after she was satisfied. So she takes the barley that she had gleaned the day. If you remember, she had food left over from whenever she had dinner with Boaz and the other guys. She packed it up in a bag too and took it to her. Said, here, this is what I had left over. You can eat of this too, plus of what I have brought to you. And 19, her mother-in-law then said to her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed. So she took her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the name of the man whom I had worked today was Boaz. So, she took notice too. So she's telling her mother-in-law, she goes, I was working, there was this guy. And so she's telling her, Mom, check this out, you got to listen. This dude's a stud. He's awesome. He's rich, he's single, he's cute. And this is his name. And so she lays out the name Boaz. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed, O Lord, verse 20, may he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and to the dead. And again, Naomi said to her, the man is our relative. He is one of our closest relatives. A while ago I said aunt. This is where I get this from, okay? He was a very close relative. Naomi just tells us that he's a very close relative. So she knows him well. So she hears this. She's excited. This man's fixing to be blessed. And he's family, right? Verse 21, then Ruth, the Moabitess, said, furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that the others do not fall upon you in another field. And so she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So she comes through harvest here, and Naomi is telling Ruth, you need to stay. You need to stay close by. Stay in his sight. Stay in his graces. Stay where he can see you. This is a good thing. He is family. He will take care of us. And Naomi's not just doing this to be a bum, okay? She's not telling her, listen, you need to do everything you can do to get a hold of this guy. That's not what she's saying. She's saying to her, listen, this is a good thing. In fact, she says it's good. Remember, Naomi in chapter 1 was a little bitter towards God. But notice what she said about God in these verses. She says, God has not forgot about us. So what did all of this just do? It just took a woman that was bitter at God for all the things that she had lost. Bitter at God because they had to leave her homeland because of a famine and go into a foreign land, where in the foreign land her husband dies, her sons die, and she's bitter. They come back home, and now here, because God has set into motion, even when they didn't even think it was happening, they didn't know it was happening, God had set into motion a plan. An unlikely plan, by the way. But God had set into a plan to move in and to set them up and to bring the heart of Naomi back, but also to bring the heart of Ruth back. And so, as we see this word Hesed, only few times that it's really mentioned here is by three different people, mentioned by Naomi, by God, and by Boaz. This kindness, this loyalty, this mercy, this blessing. Here in this particular story, Boaz is kind of the hero to the story here today. But why is he the hero? He don't even know he's the hero. But he's the hero because of his character. He's the hero because he's a man of God. He's the hero in this story because he's doing what's right. He did not have to, listen, he didn't have to do that for Ruth. She's a foreign woman. He did not have to do any of that, but he did. And then the other part of the story is of Ruth. Ruth is the other hero in this particular part of the story as well. Why? Because of what she's doing for her mother-in-law that she didn't have to do. And because she was doing for her mother-in-law what she didn't have to do, God rewarded her with a man that took notice of her, that eventually it blesses her, eventually provides for her, and eventually falls in love with her. All this to say is that our character, who we are, speaks volumes to people who we have no idea. Our character, what we do, how we react, what we say has such a huge effect on people that we don't even know, we don't even see. Naomi, in this particular part of the story, she had no idea who Boaz was. But Boaz knew who she was. Why did Boaz know who she was? It's because it had been told to him of her character. And that's why he took notice of her. Our character, being that of the character of God, may change the life of someone. May change the attitude or the temperament, a decision, a choice of someone by just our character and how we hold ourselves. Let me pray for us. Our gracious God, I thank you. Father, I love this story just because it brings to light for me of how many times that you work in our life behind the scenes that we don't even know about. God, how you're setting things up for us, how you're making moves and how you're making changes, Father, for our future that we don't even know about. And God, and I pray that we would be obedient, that Father, that our character would be true, our character would be whole, our character would be worthy. Father, just like it was for Ruth and for Boaz, that Father, the things that they were doing that they didn't even know anyone was paying attention to. Father, maybe we're that servant that can come and just serve alongside and leave behind all the things. Father, maybe we're that Boaz we're the ones that can provide. We're the ones that can give to those that are in need. And so, God, I just pray that our character, who we are, Father, would hold true of your calling. And Father, that we would be found worthy in it. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Those of you that are joining us online, we want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you have an opportunity to join us again next week. We'll see you guys later.